Hi everyone, D-Keys here, bringing you a few Elementalist updates to tide you over between the Frostbow nerf and the introduction of Tempest in Heart of Thorns. While the Frostbow nerf did decrease LE DPS slightly, Staff LE is still one of the top 2 DPS builds in PvE, and in my opinion helps free up a utility slot in the Scepter Hammer and Dagger focus builds so that those two builds can be better at what they already do. Even after this nerf, I think having an Elementalist in a party does a lot, including bringing easy access to swiftness and fury. Though you may not necessarily want more than one, since other classes can bring a lot to the group too, and taking the time to double freeze a boss now really hurts your DPS since you can't make up that DPS with Frostbow 4. First, let's look at what changed with traits. Fire traits remain unchanged, taking Burning Precision, or Conjure as appropriate, Pyromancer's Training, and Persisting Flames for that Fury. In Air, Ferocious Winds is unbugged and properly gives you Frosty based on your precision. But for the Master level, instead of taking Tempest Defense in most cases, I would really only save that for really short fights, and take Inscription instead for that utility of Glyph Recharge reduction, especially on your Glyph of Storms, and your Glyph of Elementals if you're using that. Of course, for fresh air builds, take Aeromancer's Training. And at the Grandmaster level, you'll take Bolts to the Heart for Staff and Scepter Hammer, or Fresh Air for fresh air builds for Dagger Focus mainly. Now, since you won't be camping water to cast Frostbow 4 anymore, this has really freed up the ability to take Arcane instead of water. Now on large hitboxes, you'll still sometimes want to camp water for a really good Frostbow 4 burst, but it's no longer as central to the Staff LE rotation. If using Arcane, take Renewing Stamina, Final Shielding, and finally Bountiful Power. Since an LE can easily maintain Perma Swiftness, Perma Fury, and Might, you already have 6% from those moons. You'll have pretty good uptime on Renewing Stamina for Vigor, so all your party needs to do is maintain a little bit better than one more boon, whether that's Quickness, or Prot, or Regen, or Aegis, to get to that 10% threshold where Arcane is just about as good as water in a typical rotation. For gear for a Staff Elementalist, I would recommend full Assassin's Armor now, since Ferocious Winds has been unbugged. In addition to that, I would recommend Assassin's Trinkets when you can get them, and otherwise a Berserker weapon and Berserker's Trinkets where you don't have Assassin's options. If you don't have access to Assassin's Trinkets, which you get from completing parts of the Dungeoneer achievement, you can swap those out for Berserker's Trinkets and use an Assassin's Staff instead. If you are looking to put infusions into your offensive or defensive slots, use Power Infusions, which is different than the Precise Infusions that I was recommending earlier, but also goes against other builds. But if you happen to have Precise Infusions already, like I do, just swap in a little bit of Berserker's gear to get back to close to a 100% crit rate when fully buffed. This also has the benefit of being good in high-level fractals and Ara against creatures that are level 81 and higher, so you'll see some extra benefit from this high crit chance. I would still recommend Sigils of Night and Force for nighttime dungeons, and Force and Air for other situations when you don't have a Slaying Sigil and Force. Now this is all particularly for the Staff build that has changed so much. For Dagger Focus and for Lightning Hammer builds, you'll have enough crit from being in Air Attunement or from that lightning hammer that you don't need to go as heavy on the assassin's gear. So if you prefer one of those two playstyles, stick with a more berserker's heavy loadout, including berserker's armor and berserker's weapons, though you could get away with assassin's trinkets if you really wanted to. Also, I don't recommend a sigil of energy for staff because optimally you won't be swapping out of fire all that much, though for Scepter hammer and Dagger focus builds you swap around a lot, so you'll want a sigil of energy somewhere in your weapon loadout so you have access to that. If you'd like a rundown of weapon skills, I would recommend that you check out one of my other guides that go through those in more detail, because I'm trying to keep this a little bit shorter and a little bit more high level. So for your heal, I would recommend Arcane Brilliance for most situations, just for that extra blast finisher. If you need extra Condi removal, take Ether Renewal, which also has the benefit of being on a really low cooldown in case you can't finish that channel. In Dagger focus and Scepter hammer rotations, Frostbow is just about only good for its Deep Freeze and Frost Fan. Ice Storm, which was heavily nerfed, is only useful against large groups of mobs or against targets with exceptionally large hitboxes such as Loopy. For those weapon sets, it's best to stack Might, conjure Frostbow when running in, and then lead off with a Deep Freeze, and Frost Fan before continuing your rotation. With staff, Icebow can still be used in rotations, but how you use it has changed. You can either stack Might and then use Deep Freeze and Frost Fan, working in your Glyph of Storms in Air Attunement for that extra vuln, or you could continue on with your rotation, and then when in Fire Attunement, use your Lava Font, cast or pick up a Frostbow, use a Deep Freeze if necessary, then Ice Storm and Frost Fan before dropping it and continuing your rotation. There's not enough filler now to go into Water Attunement and cast that Frost Fan and keep your DPS up, so just stay in Fire. On small to medium targets, this is actually no more of a DPS gain than using Arcane Wave, except in fights that are about 22 to 30 seconds long due to cooldowns. And even then, if your party mate decides to pick up a bow out of habit, they're taking not only their own DPS, but stealing some of yours, because you can benefit from that Frostbow being slightly better than your fireballs. Alternatives to the Frostbow are Arcane Wave for that extra blast finisher, which is great for Fury maintenance if you are the only Ellie in long fights, or Arcane Blast, which is a slightly shorter cooldown, so it would be higher DPS theoretically. Or if your party's having trouble maintaining burning, you can take Glyph of Elemental Power to cast in Fire Attunement, though it also has great defensive utility when cast in water or earth as well. If you want a defensive utility, Arcane Shield, Lightning Flash for lining up that meteor shower while maintaining your own safety, Earth Shield, and even Mist Form are reasonable options. Your other utilities for a Dagger focus or staff build should still be Signet of Fire and Glyph of Storms, though with Lightning Hammer builds, of course, you'll want that Conjure Lightning Hammer instead. Though sometimes if I am the only Ellie in the party, I'll swap out that Signet of Fire for that extra blast finisher, just for that Fury uptime. I did a little bit of research on elementals recently, and for the lesser elementals, the only one ever worth using is the Earth Elemental, and even then he doesn't really last long, just because he can't put Prot on himself. For the Elite Glyph, the Fire Ellie does about 300 DPS unbuffed to a group, while the Air Ellie does more like 500 unbuffed to a single target. Ice Ellie has a nice ice field on a low cooldown, and its command skill will CC nearby enemies and heal nearby allies, so that's useful in some practice situations when you're taking a lot of chip damage. such as at the Ice Elemental source, or at the end of the Aetherblade facility Fractal. The Earth Elemental is an amazing tank and has a command skill that will give itself protection, so it will last a long time, so we often use that a lot at, say, Old Tom in Fractals. Though having a secondary source of prot, such as a Hammer Guardian, will let this glyph of Elemental's Elemental last a very, very long time. Though the Ice Elemental and Earth Elemental do 200 DPS or even less than that. As a DPS alternative, a Staff Ellie can cast Lava Font, and then you conjure Fiery Greatsword, and use skills 4 and 5 before dropping and resuming their rotation. Though I would warn you that often using the Fiery Greatsword as a running skill will save you more time on your dungeon run than using it for DPS. Overall, not much has changed for Ellie despite the nerf. The class is still very strong and capable of a lot of offensive support. Just make sure your party mates know they shouldn't be picking up your frost bows unless you're double freezing and there isn't a second Ellie in the party. Thanks for watching, and expect new builds when Heart of Thorns hits, as long as those overloads aren't nerfed into the ground. They were really strong in the last beta weekend event, and they'll hopefully be a lot of fun to play.